And I think for Trump, there's got to be a strong temptation in order to try and focus on the business he wants to focus on, to rein in Musk to some degree or to distance himself. And of course, from the 20th of January, he is the president. And I think the interpersonal dynamics between him and Musk have to change after that point.
Let's talk about the United States. Donald Trump's election victory will be ratified by Congress today. It is January the 6th, which is a very redolent date in recent years. But Biden is still, of course, the president for a while longer, if in name only. What's the dynamic there?
Well, I mean, I think we're in this curious sort of state of flux period where, you have a dying administration. I mean, people often talk about them being lame ducks from, the moment the elections happened back in November, and then the incoming administration beginning to shape things. And it's, I think, going to produce quite an unpredictable week or two. We've already seen some things. I mean, some people saying, for example, that Turkey giving the thumbs up to its allies in Syria to move on Aleppo was a move in part motivated by a feeling that Biden was already out for the count. Let's take advantage of the situation. So people try to take advantage of it. But on the other hand, you also get people sort of rushing to try and finish business, as it were, before the old administration goes out. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment in relation to the Gaza hostage negotiations, which have been going on in Qatar. And, I mean, we've been here before so many times. It's hard to be optimistic. But, in the last 24 hours, there have been suggestions that Hamas has come back with a list of names and, more precise idea about who they want from among Palestinian prisoners for those people. So it's just conceivable that something may happen on that track because, the feeling is that once Trump gets his feet under the desk, then it could take many weeks or even months to get back to a similar point in the negotiation.
And is the thinking there that, I mean, one would assume that that Trump rather will be more pro-Israel and more hostile to Hamas, not that the current White House is friendly to Hamas. But is the thinking there that the dynamic would be dramatically different under Trump, or more just that the mere business of transition means that everything will get put on hold for a month or two?
Well, I think... if you look at the people that Trump has selected, for example, his ambassador to Jerusalem, and it is Jerusalem, of course, with the US, not to Tel Aviv as it is for most other countries, various other appointees, it's a disaster for the Palestinians. There's no two ways about it. Now, you might argue that creates a negotiating incentive to try and achieve something in these last days of the Biden administration. Does Netanyahu then overplay his hand because he knows what's coming? Very, very hard to say. But there's been a lot of attention around the number of 34 has been used and whether 34 hostages can be freed in these last days. There's another negotiating effort, by the way, going on with President Biden's envoy for Lebanon, because the deal that was done before the ceasefire, it's only got, I think, 2-3 weeks to run. It was a sort of 60-day ceasefire. And there's been a fair bit of huffing and puffing from Hezbollah and from the Israelis that, we're ready to, start the war again.
Really?
Yeah. So it doesn't actually end until after the inauguration of President Trump. But I think there are attempts going on in the dying days of the Biden administration to try and buttress that Lebanese ceasefire and try and make sure it doesn't slip back into an open conflict. So in some sense, you might say, some of these could be positive outcomes if the diplomacy gets some kind of head of steam, but it really is dying days kind of stuff.
Biden's also doing things domestically before he's gone. There's just been a big mass offshore oil drilling ban as well. This kind of thing, I mean, presumably if Trump doesn't like it, he can just overturn it. But is it just about binding his hands a little bit, slowing him down?
I think so, possibly. Well, the drill, baby, drill slogan that Trump's used, he loves all that, doesn't he? And I suppose what Biden's trying to do is put a few speed bumps in the way in certain areas of policy in order to, and in some ways, in some things he's done, a little bit of consolidation of his own legacy, such as it is. But, as you get the power flowing to the incoming administration, you start to get people trying to get readouts. And once again, here, I think there's scope for some instability and fear or whatever going around the Middle East. So one of the things that's emerged in the Wall Street Journal yesterday was a briefing from Trump officials saying they're actively considering bombing Iran to stop the nuclear program there. There had also been some leaks along the lines of oh, well, if you want to stop the Houthis attacking shipping in the Red Sea, why not just take it up with Iran and have a go at them? So there are people in the Trump administration who think along those lines too. So as the new administration comes in, there'll be lots of people trying to read what's going on. And when you get something like that appearing in the Wall Street Journal, which clearly from an Iranian perspective would be a disaster, one assumes it would be a joint US-Israeli attack on their nuclear facilities, their air defences having already been taken down by the Israelis a couple of months ago. You've got the potential for all kinds of other stuff happening. Add into that a third point on the compass, Elon Musk, trying to assert himself in all sorts of ways. I mean, obviously, you've focused on the UK domestic politics aspect of that, but in all sorts of other ways. I mean, it's a quite extraordinary state of flux.
Do you think, I mean, the relationship between Trump and Musk is fascinating, is going to continue to be fascinating. Something that's been astonishing over the last few days is that, given that, and as far as we can possibly understand it, Musk is about to be part of an incoming US administration, and yet he seems to have the time to be focusing his energy not just on Britain, on Germany as well. That doesn't really point towards a man who's really going to sort of knuckle under and get on with the job at hand, does it?
No, I mean, he just seems to be relishing the position that fate and judgment have put him into. I mean, you've only got to think about those tweets attacking Starmer and Jess Phillips and all these other figures in the British government to think, hang on a minute, how do we now deal with a White House banquet or something like that, a meeting at the White House, where Musk is also present?
Yeah.
How is Keir Starmer supposed to deal with that?
He's literally calling for a regime change. It's not something our allies normally do.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a quite extraordinary situation. Now, I hear, by the way, that Keir Starmer is trying to get in there in early February. So that situation could materialise quite quickly. And I think for Trump, there's got to be a strong temptation in order to try and focus on the business he wants to focus on, to rein in Musk to some degree or to distance himself. And of course, from the 20th of January, he is the president. And I think the interpersonal dynamics between him and Musk have to change after that point.
Do you think Trump could... I mean, look, he's not somebody who you can necessarily track the political calculations because it always seems a bit erratic and whim-based. Nonetheless, with the fight that Musk had over the visas a couple of weeks ago, the sort of visas for particular, whatever it was, particularly talented individuals or whatever it was, and Trump ended up backing him. Do you think there will be a bit of Trump that is a bit wary of losing support to the right? I know one of the first things he's expected to do when he gets in office is to pardon the January 6th rioters. But will he be thinking, he's had a bit of pushback from the even more MAGA than him people. Will he be worried about
on the visa thing?
Yeah, on the visa thing, yeah.
Well, the other thing which Musk has been quite explicitly lobbying for is no sudden action on China tariffs, which is also obviously red meat for the MAGA supporters who want to see China punished for what they see as unfair trading practices. Trump's talked about tariffs up to 60% on Chinese goods. Now, of course, when you've got an integrated Tesla supply chain that goes across the US and China, as Musk has, you can see that causing all sorts of trouble. And he's been openly lobbying against it. So Trump is going to have to decide to what extent he will hear the arguments of, one of America's greatest industrialists, which you can argue that someone of that ilk should always have some influence on policy, as it was in the visa case, or whether he has to cut his losses. I mean, it's going to be fascinating seeing how it works out. And of course, if we take Trump term one as a guide, people fell out pretty quickly with Trump during his first administration. So. It's fascinating. I mean, Musk himself, of course, has such personal power, unlike many of Trump's cabinet appointees, that there'll be risks for Donald Trump in sort of casting him out.
If one of his first acts is indeed pardoning the January the 6th rioters, what's the impact of that likely to be? Because they won't just be out of jail. They'll be out and talking. They'll be out and making a noise. And the whole. I guess people don't still want to discuss necessarily too much about what happened in the last but one election. But, they do have a narrative that it was stolen. They do have a narrative that the Capitol wasn't stormed when in fact it was, and this sort of noisy crowd injecting itself into US politics again. It's quite a thing.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, I find it interesting. I mean, presumably, if he does a widespread or total pardon, they'll all just be very happy, won't they? And they'll say one or two obliging things about Trump, and people, sometimes the experience of jail causes people to seek a quieter life, and sometimes it radicalizes them still further. So where they end up, I mean, who knows? There's clearly another series for Gabriel Gatehouse there with his with his Coming Storm podcast. But I mean, I think your questions about does the sort of MAGA revolution kind of eat its president or whatever in the longer run? It is a fascinating question. I mean, and I suppose we'll see it develop through Trump term 2 as to where does it focus for the future, and does it regard Trump as somebody who has successfully fulfilled its objectives, or begin to feel he's a bit of a, either a sellout or somebody who's been co-opted by the swamp.
Well, you would assume that because a lot of its objectives, that MAGA objectives, are not necessarily reality-based. Any reality-based administration is going to struggle to give them what they want. Because I mean, look, you mentioned, before I let you go, you mentioned this hint that was given that the members of the Trump administration are thinking about military action on Iran.
Yeah.
In his first term in the White House, one sort of almost consistent thing about Trump was his huge reluctance, his huge wariness of allowing America to be involved in any kind of new sort of military conflict, his wariness of being seen to be responsible for that happening. Do you think that will last?
My reading of it at the moment, the signals, is that Trump is trying to intimidate Iran into entering into new restrictions on its nuclear industry. The fact is, I mean, you don't really announce that you're going to go and bomb someone in that way if that is seriously your intention. I think it can be seen as part of, what in Trump's first administration was called the campaign of maximum pressure against Iran. In some ways, it was successful in the first term. I mean, after he killed the Revolutionary Guard General Qasem Soleimani, there was complete shock in Iran and a feeling that they had to be really careful about what they did regionally, or else Trump would provoke a war with them. But then that comes back to your underlying assumption: is he seeking to intimidate, but actually unprepared to go to war? Or is he prepared to go to war? In which case, the intimidation will probably be a lot more effective. And that's around the line, isn't it, with so much of international politics and force, as to, does he mean it? I suspect he probably is willing to join in an enterprise with Israelis to take down as much of the Iranian nuclear program as can be done so by military action. But I think he's definitely going to try to achieve something, but by coercion and threats, before defaulting to the military option.